in all seriousness, there is some depressing news, and it has to do with the news business. I'm going to cite off some statistics for you, which that tell the story. For statistic number one, in the last 2 years, more than 30,000 newsroom jobs have been lost in American newspapers. Ad revenue has fallen 23% in the last 2 years. Some papers are in bankruptcy, others have lost 3/4 of their value. In San Francisco and Boston, the largest dailies lose more than $1 million a week. In the last 2 years, U.S. daily newspapers that have closed include papers in cities such as Denver, Baltimore, and Albuquerque. And how about this? The following cities have no daily newspaper, which means if you're not on broadband, which was the subject of the last panel, you're out of luck. Ann Arbor, Seattle, Tucson, and Madison, no daily newspaper. Viewership for local news, eat your chocolate cake, it's going to get there. Viewership for local TV news has fallen by 12% in the last decade. Just last week, as I'm sure you read, ABC News announced they were reducing their staff by a third. CBS News is in the process of laying off another 100 journalists. Even the BBC is cutting. The number of newspaper reporters covering state capitals is half of what it was 5 years ago. A large share of reporting of local government, economic activity, and local quality of life has simply disappeared. According to a recent Pew study, the public's assessment of the accuracy of news is at its lowest level in more than 2 decades, and American views of media bias and independence match previous lists. And to wrap it up, I offer up this quote from David Simon, who you will either know as a former Baltimore Sun reporter or as the creator of HBO's The Wire, both notable achievements. And it is this: the next 10 to 15 years in this country are going to be a halcyon era for state and local political corruption. Because that's what happens when no one's watching. So that's a depressing part, and I think that there is no doubt that we will look back at the time we are living in right now and say, this is the time when everything changed. But, so you're saying, okay, now where's the part where you're going to cheer me up? What we're looking at now, I should say, first of all, that I am just by nature a glass half full kind of person. So, somebody else can stand up here and tell you, to hide under a rock because all is lost. But I actually truly don't feel that way. Because what we're looking at now is not the death of journalism. What we're looking at is a revolution in the business model for news. Now, it's going to be a long time until things shake out, and we really don't know where we're going to land. This is an era of massive experimentation. But what we have to do is stop looking back and talking about the good old days, and we have to relentlessly deal with the new reality. Here's a quote from, of all people, Shimon Peres that I like very much. If a problem has no solution, he said, it may not be a problem, but a fact. Or, as my favorite media guru, Clay Shirky, said, slightly less grandiosely, things are going to get a whole lot weirder before they get saner. And that's okay, because I'm convinced that out of the ashes of all of these laid-off journalists and troubled news organizations will rise, in fact, is already beginning to rise, a fantastic new era of information, largely around public media, because public media has a civic mission to serve the public. And there are many definitions of journalism, but one of my favorite comes from Bill Kovach and Tom Rosenstiel, who defined it as the information citizens need to be free and self-governing. And we at NPR and many, many other public media organizations are holding to that mission, and in fact, we're growing. And yet there are still hand-wringers out there, and they are unfortunately propagating some truths, but also a few myths. So I actually want to take a couple of minutes to debunk some of the myths that are out there, all of which I'm sure you've heard. Myth number one, there is no audience for quality content. It's a niche. People just want yelling partisanship. There's almost a sense that the next generation of people don't want to read anything that's more than 140 characters. I do now. There's a little bit out there, so yes, I'm a Twitter follower myself, but here's a statistic that comes from public radio, and I promise I only won't be talking about just only NPR and public radio, that gives me hope. More than 32 million people tune into public radio every week. Not only that, but their median listening, this is the median across that 32 million people, are listening 4.5 hours every week. Now that is engagement. And not only that, but they're giving. Again, looking at public radio stations where the act of giving is really less of a transaction than a sign of loyalty and appreciation for what we do, pledge drives are higher than ever. Across public radio, 300, this is not to NPR, these are to public radio stations, $300 million has been raised. This is, from those pledge drives that we all are annoyed about, but they actually work. $300